I'm very happy to introduce our panel for the evening. Our panel, Stories of Struggle. We're very blessed to have three folks from different parts of this side of the country who can speak with us about their unique struggles in their communities, as well as give us some context for what's happening with fracking as an overall picture and how it impacts all of us. So we're going to give each of them an opportunity to speak, and then we'll have lots of time for discussion at the end. This portion of the evening will also be streamed in Vancouver tomorrow morning. So not only is it enriching our conversations here tonight, but also people's conversations on the other side of this country tomorrow morning. So it's a very unique setup. So I'd like to start with Anne Pohl. Anne is the chairperson and spokesperson for the Kent County, New Brunswick chapter of the Council of Canadians. She's a member of the Copit Lodge community, a member of the core support group for the IMW Legal Challenge, and a founding member of Upriver Environment Watch and the New Brunswick Anti-Shale Gas Alliance. She is a mother and grandmother of mixed Jewish European heritages and has been working in solidarity with Indigenous peoples of Northern Turtle Island for 25 years. So please welcome Anne Pohl.
Good evening. I'm nervous. Doesn't usually happen to me, but I am tonight. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the very nice welcome to be here, Kenneth, in Mi'kma'ki and Signuktuk, and thank you, Alma, for the beautiful prayer. I really appreciated that. It touched me deeply. And thank you, Pastor, too, for opening your community of faith and your space for us. I moved to New Brunswick 11 years ago, and when I first moved here, with my own background of being Jewish and having been involved in anti-racism and anti-oppression and Indigenous solidarity work for a number of years, many years, too many, I actually got kind of disappointed and thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it here, because I moved into a very rural area, an hour north of here, and it's very heavily colonized still at that time. And so I would be anywhere, and I would hear French people making remarks about English people, and English people making remarks about Mi'kmaq people, and Mi'kmaq people, and it just seemed to be going everywhere. And for me, it was really discouraging, and I really didn't know if I was going to be able to stay here. But I came here having met Kenneth Francis once, which I remember deeply, and he has no recollection of. It was actually what was responsible for making me move here was the conversation that I had with him, and then the conversation that I had with someone else he sent me to, whom nobody knows who that was. Ooh. Okay, so, but I came here knowing that I was moving to a frontier of colonialism, and that it was a place for me to see whether or not I could lend my acquired skills and knowledge to try and do some good, particularly moved by the ongoing epidemics of youth suicide in the Elsipogtog community. I guess over the years I learned a lot. Recently there's been quite a lot of work on this, and we know now that we can call New Brunswick what's called a captured state. There's one major mega corporation that runs the show. It's Irving. And controls roughly 30% or more of the provincial economy, including the media, natural resource industries, many ancillary services and businesses, such as those who ran the security detail during the anti-fracking protests. They were the owner of the land that the thumper trucks were parked on. They had some connection with the document servers who were carrying around the papers for the injunction and the lawsuit in which I was named, and so were ultimately 23 other people in 2 different suits. So their hand in glove, Irving, has been with everything that happens here, plays a major role in the capture of this state and corporate control of all the resources here. And we have 2 governments in New Brunswick. These are all things I learned after I got here. We have 2 governments in New Brunswick. We have the Liberals and we have the Conservatives, and they both belong to Irving most of the time. So, and 10% of the workforce works directly for Irving. So, I guess what I wanted to do first tonight, I know what I wanted to do first tonight, is actually talk about colonization. Because I think we have to understand colonization to understand what's happened here and what we had to work to overcome in order to win a moratorium in fracking. I'm going to start with a quote from Sartre. That's Sartre spelled S-A-R-T-R-E, because my accent in French is really bad. But I can do frack pa and worry pa. Okay. So this is directly from him. You know well enough that we are exploiters. You know too that we have laid hands on first the gold and the metals, and then the petroleum of the new continents, and that we have brought them back to the old countries. This was not without excellent results, as witness our palaces, our cathedrals, and our great industrial cities. And then when there was the threat of a slump, the colonial markets were there to soften the blow or to divert it. Is this sounding like New Brunswick a little bit? Crammed with riches, Europe accorded that man to be an accomplice of colonialism, since all of us, without exception, have profited by colonial exploitation. This fat, pale continent of Europe ends by falling into what Fanon, Frantz Fanon, rightly calls narcissism. Anyway, he goes on. So this brought up Frantz Fanon, for those of you who might be familiar with his work, The Wretched of the Earth. And I started looking at him as a way of trying to provide some context for colonization. And these are just 2 quick quotes from his first chapter of The Wretched of the Earth. It's called On Violence. Decolonization is truly the creation of new people, but such a creation cannot be attributed to a supernatural power. The thing colonized becomes a person through the very process of liberation. At a basic level, decolonization, any kind of decolonization, is a success. And the proof of success is that the social fabric has been changed from the inside out. Okay? So in a moment, I'm going to get back to how I've seen that social fabric change, and what it looks like today. But first, you're going to get one little more quote from Fanon. Decolonization sets out to change the order of the world, and clearly an agenda for total disorder. But it cannot be accomplished by the wave of a magic wand, a natural cataclysm, or a gentleman's agreement. Decolonization, we know, is an historical process. In other words, it can only be understood, it can only find its significance and become self-coherent insofar as we discern the history-making movement which gives it forms and understanding. So, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and try and outline for you the history-making movement that has begun the decolonization process in New Brunswick. I mentioned that we are a captured state. We still are a captured state, but there are major pockets of liberation happening all over the province right now, and it looks like we may actually, succeed in coming together, and you'll be hearing more about some of the exciting things that are happening, like the Peace and Friendship Alliance and some of the other things throughout the day, the evening tonight and tomorrow, the day tomorrow. So this fracking thing started out by the Liberals had the government at the time, and they signed a bunch of leases without telling anybody that covered, I think, 1 million hectares of the, I'm looking for a nod somewhere here, but I think it was 1 million hectares of the province, 7 different companies. A lot of people got upset, and the Conservatives who were in opposition at the time said, that's wrong. They must go out and consult with the people if they're going to do that. So anyways, the government changed in an election. You know, it went from red to blue. That was because of the usual things like government arrogance and some other things like kickbacks that shouldn't have happened and other kinds of things that normally happen in a captured state and happen here. And the Conservatives came in, and the first thing they did was forget that they'd said that there had to be any kind of consultation, and they said, green light on fracking, right? Green light, let's go, let's go. So then there were more protests, and civil society organizations got involved, notably the Conservation Council of New Brunswick, and also the New Brunswick Environment Network, and as well some of the established chapters of the, well, particularly one established chapter of the Council of Canadians. That would be the one from St. John that was in existence at that time. And then people started getting excited because they were getting a little bit of information about how bad this fracking thing was, and it was going to happen everywhere, and there were some open houses happening. And in the east of the province, the Willistic people really took it up and started moving with it. And in the west of the province, the Acadians really took it up and started moving with it. And then everybody started talking to everybody for the first time ever. And and then there was a big petition campaign, and then there were protests, and there were rallies, and there were all kinds of other things, and we're still in 2011 right now. The leases were signed in fall of 2010, and this is 2011. So the government tried its divide and conquer thing, and went to the leadership of a small organization that had started up that was trying to pull everybody together, and managed to pick off a couple of people and get them to go to a press conference at which an announcement was made that the problems were all solved now because one regulation was going to get passed, was being passed the next week or something like that, and then it did get passed, which required the leaseholders in these shale gas areas to test every potable water well that they planned that they would come within 250 feet of if they were drilling, or 500 feet if they were running their seismic tests or something like that, or meters or whatever. Anyway, but there was a measurement. It was close to the houses, close to the wells, and it was going to be every one that had to be done. So then, up where I live in Kent County, people are very sensible. And they're thinking about all of this, and they're saying, we can't trust these guys. We're not going to let them test our water, right? So that's when what I would call the No Pasarán movement began. Basically, that's from the Spanish Civil War, and it means they shall not pass. And about half the people in Kent County said, they're not testing my water. They're not even coming on my property. We're not going to let them test our water. We don't trust them. So now I have a certain set of skills, just like everybody else does in the movement. And one of the skills that I bring is that I spent 10 years or 8 years working on municipal bylaws and stuff. So I'm listening to all these people that I don't even totally agree with, because they're saying they don't want their water tested, right? You know, that's the way to check if something's wrong with your water. You get it tested beforehand. And I'm not even sure I agree with that, but I'm listening to them all say they don't want their water tested. And then I'm looking at the bylaw, and the bylaw says that they have to test every single water well, or that's what it says. To proceed, they must test every single water well. So I called up the government, and I said, what are you going to do about this? I said, what's going to happen, like when you go down the road with your seismic trucks, when they go down the road? Are you going to have them like lift their thumper when they go in front of a house? Are they going to have like a registry of the places that have been tested and the ones that haven't? Long story short, the testing didn't happen that year. The seismic activity didn't happen that year because they had a problem. When I was talking to the guy in the government, he said, "Oh, we've got a problem, I'll get back to you on that." And he never did. But it didn't happen. But what did happen was that some of us started getting visits from the RCMP. And in the Mi'kmaq community, Susan Levi-Peters, a past chief of the community at Elsipogtog, is one of the people that got visited, and I got visited, and there were a couple of other people in the Acadian community that also got visited, and we were told basically that we couldn't do, we couldn't, if they did decide to come, that we couldn't go out on the road and protest, and so, because another set of skills I have is like writing information brochures and stuff like that, I had written a thing for people because I knew most people in Kent County had never been to a protest before. So I'd actually written a thing that said, this is what you need to do if you're going to go to a protest. Like, these are your rights, and, don't carry any weapons to the site, and don't drink anything beforehand, and, park your car in a legal place, and don't curse at the police officer, and stuff like that, right? And watch out for each other, and it was like a piece of paper like that, 4 sides. Your rights as a protester. So when the police officer came to me, I gave him one, and he left, and we had another couple years of me getting a lot of contact with the police department and the RCMP, and anyway, so did other people, so I'm neither bragging nor complaining. I was in with many other good people at the time. So anyways, that's kind of how it went for 2012. There was attempted intimidation, and, they hired some guy named Louis Lapierre, who turned out not to have any credentials at all, and sent him around the province to have public consultation meetings to produce a report that we all knew was going to say, fracking should go ahead, is perfect, right? Meanwhile, some doctors in the province got excited and about the whole idea of there being fracking going on here and all the health risks that were emerging related to that. And so they got in touch with the medical officer of health, and she wrote a report about fracking, which is an excellent report. It was peer acclaimed by the public health inspectors across the country, and the government tried to hide that report. And Upriver Environment Watch, actually, our group invited her to do a public presentation of it, so that got out into the public. And then other groups started asking her to do public. So every time they came up with something, as one of my allies has said many times, they constantly underestimated us. They kept thinking that we weren't smart enough to figure out what they were doing, and we didn't know how to deal with the kind of stuff that they were putting in front of us. And yes, I bring certain skills to it, but so does everybody bring certain skills to it. And I've never had the feeling that if I wasn't there at something or whatever, that it was going to fall apart, because I always knew that there were enough of us with enough diverse skills and enough things going on that somehow it was going to work out. Things were going to turn out just fine. And basically that's what happened. So, let's see. I've been told I don't have too long yet, so I better move along here. There was a movement from groups in mostly in St. John to raise money to have a legal case based on science, and that put a lot of pressure on, because there's people raising money saying the science is going to prove that fracking is not safe. And then an organization developed from that called the New Brunswick Anti-Shale Gas Alliance, which put itself in the position of being able to respond very quickly to things, which are diverse networks and sort of spread out community groups weren't really able to do. But they also pushed forward on the science suit, as it's called. And then I don't know more happened. And a number of people from Elsipogtog got very seriously involved with that. A man from there fasted along with Chief Teresa Spence at Victoria Island, and people came back from there and they took a look around. They said, whoa, what's this fracking, right? And I imagine you'll hear more about that tomorrow from Katrina and possibly from Kenneth. But there was so that brought Elsie right in with the Acadians and the Anglos in Kent County, and now we're into the early part of 2013, and really when push comes to shove, everybody in Kent County makes some part of their livelihood from the water or the land. And so our common ground, our common water, is very obvious to us. And by this time, everybody was talking to everybody, and people were not making the nasty remarks anymore. And life in Kent County was rosy for me, except kind of busy. Then we did training for civil disobedience. One thing that I did do, another place where I had expertise because I've done coalition building before, is I brought everybody together and asked them to got them to agree on some basic points of unity. And nonviolence was a key one. And this is why I can go anywhere, anytime, any place and say, we didn't burn those police cars. It was done, as far as I'm concerned, by agent provocateur or someone who was directly paid by the state, because I know that we didn't do it. And some of the other things that we've been accused of, our movement has been accused of, I'm confident that those things were not done by our people either. And when I say our people, I mean the whole range, from the warriors to the grandmothers to the kids. I mean everybody. So let's see. I think I've talked enough about, well, actually, Christian Peacemaker team was a big help. When we first started our protest out there, she says I have 1 minute. I'm probably going to take 2 or 3. So when Christian Peacemaker teams came in, that was a big help because there really wasn't anybody in our region who had experience being at these kind of protests before. And it wasn't a perfect fit for them, what we were doing, but they were so much help to us just to be there to watch what was going on and to document what was going on. And you know, I had tried to be the police liaison person for a couple of weeks up until then, but you know, it was hard to wear too many hats at once. And plus I had a full-time job, so. Then we're to the summer, and we're to some of the stuff that I'm sure Kenneth is going to talk about, like the evictions and the notices and the steps that were taken by the First Nation, and up to today the work that's going on with Yepju Meli Yeptasiktido Uskutgamu. I probably didn't pronounce it as well as you did, even though I've said it a million times. The moratorium as it stands right now, what happened was that the Conservatives then went into an election, and they wanted to have, they ran on a say yes to shale gas, and the Liberals' position strengthened throughout the election to the point where the Liberal leader, now the Premier Brian Gallant, was saying that there would be a moratorium if his government got elected, because he knew that that's the only way that he could be sure of getting elected. So there is a moratorium, and there's a commission of people who are going around talking to people, but so far they don't seem to be talking to any of the First Nations in the way that they should be, free, prior, and informed consent. They have 5 conditions for lifting the moratorium, and I imagine those are going to get discussed more as the day goes on and tomorrow. I want to close, though, with a little bit from Pam Palmater and from my absolute favorite, which is Paolo Freire. So I'm going to start with Paolo. If someone reading this text were to ask me, with an ironic smile, whether I believe that in order to change society, it is enough to surrender to the fatigue of constantly stating that change is possible and that human beings are not mere spectators, but also actors in history, I would say no, that's not enough. But I would also say that changing implies knowing that it is possible to do it. It is certain that men and women can change the world for the better, can make it less unjust, but they can do so only from the starting point of the concrete reality in which they live. And that's what really, I think, brought us together, was the concrete reality in which we lived, but with a larger vision. And he goes on to talk about the vision. Pam Palmacher, whom I had the opportunity to listen to twice in the last month, talks about Flanagan's report in 2009. Tom Flanagan. How many people have heard of Tom Flanagan? He said that the worst thing that could ever happen to Canada would be if the environmentalists and the Indigenous people got together. And that's exactly what happened with I Don't Know More. And not only, says Pam, was it the environmentalists and the Indigenous people, but it was everybody, the unionists, the churches, everybody got together. And there were no bombs, and there was no guerrilla warfare. There was standing in the street dancing. There was, being together. There was feasting together. There was, the joy of building that new society, that undoing that old social fabric and weaving a different one. So Pam concluded her remarks when I heard her by saying, "Welcome to the new school of terrorism." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. I think hearing that Paulo Freire quote, thinking that, change, we can believe that change is possible when we see it happening, and seeing what's happened with you and the movements that you've been a part of, I think is inspiration for me and for many of us that are coming from other places. So thank you so much. I'm now going to invite Mike Bradfield to share with us. Mike has taught economics at Dalhousie University until 2007 for about 40 years. His research focuses on the economic and social development of the Atlantic provinces and on the impact of market imperfections on wages, employment, and prices. He has worked with various community organizations, church groups, and unions on issues of poverty, the environment, and fiscal policy, including the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and the National Union of Public and General Employees. Most recently, Mike has served on the Nova Scotia Review Panel, looking at the implications of hydraulic fracturing in Nova Scotia. Mike and his wife, Sue Ellen, live in Halifax, and they have 3 daughters and 8 grandchildren. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Kairos and all the people who worked hard to bring this together, coast to coast, almost coast to coast. And for you people for coming out, and particularly for my fellow panelists and the people like them who have fought so hard in their struggles to try to bring common sense to policy. I, as an economist, have struggled within the fracking panel, but I see my function in this sort of situation and in policy general is basically to debunk a lot of the economic propaganda that the vested interest trot out. I had listed in my notes several different editorials in the Chronicle Herald. I'm going to be speaking primarily from a Nova Scotia perspective. Editorials in the Chronicle Herald, articles by business communities like the Atlantic Institute of Market Studies. And so I've got a bunch of these references, and lo and behold, my wife picked up the local paper. There's an editorial about fracking and how we eventually have to get around to doing it because it's really going to be good for us. And there's an article on the latest Fraser Institute report, ironically authored by someone called Green. So it's talking about fracking as green energy. But as I say, I think it's absolutely crucial that we are in a fight for that free prior consent. And we're up against some pretty powerful people, the industry in a connection to the politicians, and quite frankly, some academics that have gone along with what they say. So I'd like to deal with some of the issues. This morning's editorial and article raised some of the things I'm going to question. But just for those of you who need a nap, I'll tell you what the summary comment is on what I do, and you can have 15 minutes rest. The basic proposition from an economist's perspective is that the pro-fracking people way overestimate the economic benefits and underestimate the economic costs. We're going to hear other people talking about the environmental and social issues, but they argue the base for fracking on the basis of the economy and the number of jobs it would create. What I often say to those people is, gee, wars create jobs, hurricanes create jobs, epidemics create jobs. No, it's not about jobs, but I'm going to deal with it on their turf. Okay, the jobs issue. The industry promises a lot of jobs and helping to solve the problem of unemployment. However, those jobs, estimates by the industry, are not independent. They're from the vested interests, and they are several times larger than the few independent estimates we have. An industry insider and a member of the Nova Scotia review panel recently told an energy conference in Halifax that fracking would be huge for the economy, and he cited the fact it would create 800 to 1,600 jobs. Well, if you're unemployed, that's a lot. That gives you better odds in finding a job. But 800 to 1,600 jobs is about 3% of the unemployed in Nova Scotia. It is not huge. It's a drop in the bucket and has all those other costs related to it. So I would say that the job impact is going to be, first of all, small, and secondly, it's a two-edged sword. If there really is a big job impact, fracking goes on primarily, almost totally, in rural areas. If you had a large workforce coming into those areas, they're going to overwhelm many of the services, things like housing, medical services, schools, that are in the area. They're going to force the local municipalities to spend huge amounts of money on either building a better infrastructure, because rural roads are not built for the huge trucks that make hundreds of trips a day in and out of the well sites. They're going to impose major costs on those communities, so that if there really was a job bonanza in this, it creates as many problems as it solves. Secondly, even though one of the members of our panel claimed that this was one of the few sustainable industries that we could count on in the future, which I thought was one of the dumbest statements I heard, the jobs that fracking creates are short-term. You have fairly massive jobs in the early development stages, but once the wells are operating, they are almost totally automated, so that the jobs shrink, and the people who are involved in the initial stages then move on. Now, you'll have a certain field that you'll develop, so they'll move on in the area, but eventually they're going to move out of the area. So what you end up, if there are a lot of jobs, is you're going to end up creating a local infrastructure to meet that extra workforce that comes in, and in 10 years or so, they're going to be gone. You're still going to be paying for that infrastructure, which you don't need anymore. So the jobs argument, first of all, I don't believe it from what the industry claims for it. And second, if the industry were right, there would still be an awful lot of problems related to it. Part of that problem is with respect to royalties, in terms of who and who gets the royalties and when you get them, in the context that it's the municipality that's going to bear the front of the costs of the fracking industry moving into their territory. But it's the province that gets the royalties, at least in Nova Scotia. I'm not sure of other places. So you get one level of government benefiting from it when they eventually start collecting royalties. You get another government immediately paying the costs. So unless you have worked out some arrangement between the province and the municipalities, the localities where fracking goes on, you're going to have this situation of the local economy getting twisted out of shape in terms of how it operates and in terms of its infrastructure, and then suddenly the province gets money, but it's the municipalities that are in debt. So that's the first point. Second point is you've got to have a well-designed royalty regime. And this is very interesting with respect to Nova Scotia. I'm not sure of other provinces. I think our royalty regime was designed for the offshore oil. What the royalty regime says in Nova Scotia is that a development has 2 years of production before you start taxing it. What you need to know about that is, with fracking, 85% of the volume of the fracking production occurs in the first year. So that you ultimately would end up charging royalties against less than 10% of the production. Not a good deal. The other thing is, how big are these royalties that are going to make the provinces richer or rich? Well, the royalties will eventually peak and then within 2 years drop precipitously. You know why they would drop precipitously within 2 years? Because the production has gone down to about 10% of the production. But how much money is this huge amount of revenue we're going to get? Well, I took the data that we used in Nova Scotia that was generated by another economist, and it comes out to, at its peak, at its highest point in Nova Scotia, the royalties from fracking would be the equivalent of adding 1/4 of 1 percentage point onto the sales tax. That's how small the royalties are relative to the existing tax base. I personally would not advocate adding anything to the sales tax because that's a regressive tax. I would advocate, and I have advocated, that what we need to do, for instance, is make capital gains fully taxed. Currently in Canada, only 50% of capital gains are taxed. If you made them 100% tax, the same as, say, unemployment insurance is, or ordinary workers' income is, if you made it fully taxed, you'd raise more money by making the tax system more progressive than you do by having a fracking industry. So, conclusion there, it ain't worth it. It's not really very much. A point that's often made in Nova Scotia and other Atlantic or maritime provinces is that, oh, fracking will save us from being dependent on the federal government. Because look at all those equalizations and other transfers we get from the federal government. But you've got to consider that, yes, the federal government makes transfers to us for health, education, etc., makes transfers for equalization, but they also tax us. So in Nova Scotia, if you add up the income tax taken out, the federal income tax taken out, the federal corporate taxes taken out, it ends up to be much higher than the amount of transfers that we get from the federal government, so that it'd be about 25% more money goes out of Nova Scotia to the federal government as comes in from the federal government. And in terms of equalization, equalizations are so much smaller that the taxes we pay to the federal government are 2.4 times the equalization payments that we receive. We are not dependent on the federal government. So the argument for needing the royalties isn't there. The argument that the royalties are significant isn't there. The second part of it, though, is to look at the costs, and I've already mentioned the cost to municipalities. In terms of building up the infrastructure, there are costs of dealing with the social, environmental, and other problems that are related. But some of the costs, for instance, in our report, are mentioned in the summary with a one-sentence statement, and not in the chapter which is supposedly dealing with the economics of the fracking industry, which is really a chapter on the finances of the fracking companies. Regulation is going to be absolutely crucial for this industry if it ever comes down the pipe. The regulation is to make sure that they perform correctly. It's also to monitor their activities, and it has to be independent regulation. It can't be the companies giving reports. Even as our committee was meeting, we were getting reports from Alberta of companies which had had leaks of the chemicals, the fracking fluids, that they were required by the environmental laws in Alberta to report immediately to the environmental department. They didn't bother reporting it, and when it got finally leaked to the media by someone, the Department of Environment didn't bother to go and check on it. So we have very loose regulations. One of the articles in today's paper talks about if we just adopt the regulations that are available in other jurisdictions, then we would be all right. Well, the other jurisdictions don't have decent regulations and they don't enforce them properly. To do that properly means spending a lot of money initially to establish a baseline set of data so that, you know, for instance, in Pictou County, they already have methane in their water. So if you started fracking around Pictou County and people started commenting on their water being flammable, the industry will say, well, that's not us. You've always had methane in your water. So you've got to have that baseline data to see what's actually happened in your jurisdiction from the fracking. There are other types of monitoring. The industry keeps saying, 2 chapters in our report initially said the technology has been perfected. And I said, you can't say it's been perfected. Well, it's getting better. Okay, but better's not good enough as far as I'm concerned. But we were told of one technology where they now can lay a grid of sensors around a fracking well and detect any kind of seismic activity caused or simultaneous or correlated to the fracking. So the question is, would industry do that on their own? And the answer says, no, that's expensive. Okay. Will our governments have the guts to tell the industry, you have to use this technology so that we know that what's happening because of what you're doing? For many of us, that's not good enough because that tells you after the fact you just got hit by a truck. It was predictable, and being told that that's what happened isn't really good enough. But it's going to be very expensive to, A, get a database that is reliable. Now, the pro-fracking people, and again it's in today's newspaper, say there is no evidence of harm, or sometimes they're more careful with their words. They say there's no evidence of cataclysmic harm from fracking. Hey, isn't that a relief? Gosh, your well's polluted, but it's not cataclysmic. So the reason there is no evidence of harm is because there isn't adequate data to be able to say anything. The Canadian Council of Academies, nice name, is often cited as saying no evidence of harm is not evidence of no harm. It works both ways. You can't be definitive, and that's why there has to be an awful lot of research so that you can nail that down. That's going to be a major expense to get the data, do the research, properly assess it, properly interpret it, and then have your regulations to make sure that you prevent those things happening. Everything has risk, they say. Okay, but as the sign says somewhere over there, is that the one with risk on it? Our risk, their reward. I would argue the experts who make the risk management analysis are not the people who are taking the risk. If you're going to argue, well, we only innovate, we only grow, we only move ahead if we have risk, that argument in a capitalist society is supposedly rational if the people who take the risk are the people who get the profit are the people who take the risk. And in fracking, it's just the reverse. So going to be expensive, and the industry should pay for that. That's not discussed in the Nova Scotia report. Okay. We've talked about infrastructure. I think I'm running out of time here. So basically what I'm saying is, first of all, we don't have enough information. We've got to spend an awful lot of money getting information gesundheit. Second, we need to have a proper discussion of how you get that prior, free, informed consent. We don't have it. So politicians are going to make comments about, oh, well, I got 18 letters from people saying I'm for fracking or whatever. No, we have to have a very clear understanding of what that prior informed consent is. And we don't have that. We have to have that discussion. That, too, is going to be a difficult process and means that fracking is going to be delayed. However, all of this is from a local or from a provincial perspective. What I'm saying is, having looked at the data and the arguments and so on, that I don't think we can justify in our own interests taking on fracking, because the economic, if you're going to argue it from an economic proposition, the economic benefits do not outweigh the economic costs. Add in the social, the environmental, and all that, take a macro perspective, where, as was already mentioned, there are several times more identified reserves of fossil fuels than we could possibly use in our environment because of their greenhouse gas effects. It makes absolutely no sense, so that I would say do some studies, do more studies, get some reliable data that's not dependent on what the industry provides you with. But I don't see a future where we should be using more fracking or using more fossil fuels. I see a future where, starting 20 years ago, we have to get off fossil fuels addiction and be intelligent about the way we generate our energy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I think there's some really helpful pieces of a roadmap in that. Our final speaker for the panel this evening is Kim Cornelissen. Kim was a former local politician who began learning about shale gas projects in Quebec when exploration projects began in her small village in 2009. Realizing that most of Quebec's arable land was claimed, Kim spent more than 3 years as vice president of the Quebec Association Fighting Air Pollution, or the AQLPA, to raise awareness on the importance of getting a moratorium. Kim is a specialist in renewable energy questions, particularly around biogas and biomethane. She has a master's degree in urban planning from the Université de Québec à Montréal, and she works as a sustainable development consultant for small rural communities. She's also working to build relationships between the Nordic countries that she visits every year and her home province of Quebec. She currently lives in Bas-Saint-Laurent. So, welcome, Kim.
Bonsoir tout le monde. I feel very privileged. I feel like I'm in a Zen country since yesterday. Everything is peaceful. We can speak French, we can speak English, everybody's together. It's so nice. Actually, shale gas, to be honest, since 2012 to 2013, I haven't been doing a lot since I moved to Bas-Saint-Laurent, because before that I was right in the middle of what was happening. But since I moved, we're stuck with the pipeline, so it made a big change. But I must tell you, the way I feel since I moved is that I feel relieved, because I know that where I live, there won't be some drilling close to my place. So I won't lose my house that I won't be able to sell, or I won't have problems with insurances and everything. And we don't talk a lot about that, but that's a big economic and social effect. So I will tell you a bit. It's very funny, also funny. It's interesting that what Anne's been saying and what Mike's been saying, you'll see there's very, very close similarities with what I'll be saying. So it might be a good thing or a bad thing. In 2008, we'll begin in 2008, there's a wonderful citizen called Joanne Dion that spoke about shale gas, and nobody was really listening because we were hearing natural gas. Natural gas seemed to be the bridge between fossil fuel and the renewable energy. So we didn't react to what was shale gas. But at the same time, same thing as Anne was saying, there's exploration who began in the valley of St. Lawrence. That means everywhere, mostly where people live. And look at what we found by chance. And mostly it's everywhere where we live in Quebec. So that all of this has been claimed in 2010. By the way, if you look at in the website of the Ministry of Natural Resources in Quebec, good luck. I cannot find it. If you can find it, you're very good. It used to be there. When people saw that, they realized that everything is claimed. And if you look closely on the, I think I have, yes, This is Montreal, Laval, Longueuil, 3 million people living around here, and it's all claimed. And you know, I don't know how it works in New Brunswick, but for us, we own on our property, we own the land, but just under, it belongs to the Queen, to the La Couronne. That means that when you go in your basement, you're not home. Mostly. So this is quite a shock. My son was living in the basement. So in 2008, 2009, we began to see the term shale gas at the Régie de l'Énergie, which is about the same thing at the ONI, the National, what is it? The Energy Board for Canada, but we have the same thing in Quebec. And we saw the term shale gas, and I have to tell you that small story. We didn't know what it was, so we called the Sierra Club in BC, and they told us a little bit, but they didn't know exactly what it was either. Since I work on biogas, which is another form of natural gas, I'll tell you after, I called my friend in Sweden, and I said, do you know about shale gas? And he said, no, I don't know about shale gas, but call my friend who's in New York City dealing with natural gas trucks, and maybe she'll be able to tell you. I send an email to that woman, and that woman says, I don't really know what it is, but then I know that some people are against it in the New York State. So I got an email address. I sent an email, and I said, there's shale gas coming in Quebec. We don't know what it is. Could you tell us a bit more? The answer I got was, I'm really sorry. So it's like, okay, I'm really sorry. What's this? And then, you know, it's like a book. And she sent me some stuff, and we really learned what was happening in the States at the time. First mentioned in the media also, because when we learned about it, we decided to go meet with the Ministry of Environment to tell them that we were about to talk about shale gas, just to tell them on Monday it will be in the news. So, because we try to be nice sometimes. The Ministry of Environment, it was the sous-ministre and not the ministry herself, and it really looks like they didn't know about shale gas either. But it might be a trick also, because it's either that they didn't know, or they were really shocked that we knew. Because I think there was a very good timing. We were 6 months ahead of everything. If we had found it 6 months after, I'm convinced that the province would be under shale invasion. So we alerted the citizens, and for a year we had these French CBC articles and stuff, but nothing happened. But one of the things we realized is that the government was using the industry papers and industry information to know more about shale gas. Yeah, that's very convenient. So we took us a couple of 100 hours to do a big French resume of what shale gas and what the many problems were also. And by the way, those who say that we're really paid a lot, no, nothing, because most of it was done voluntarily. So having the first independent document in French, we're not in the internet era, so it went into everybody, and everybody learned about it. And then, we also did that. The industry says that it's not possible that citizens could have made that thing that we made really in a garage one night. So we must be paid by the coal industry with a big PR campaign. It is true that we gave away 5,000 of those. There's some in France, in Belgium, in Norway, and in Quebec, and in New Brunswick. But really, we did it. And what we put there, we wanted to say no to shale gas. But we knew that if we said no to shale gas, they would say, oh, they don't want anything anyway, so we'll go ahead. But we said, if instead of saying that, we say we need a moratorium, we're ready to discuss. That made, I think, a big difference. But it's still, you know, we're talking about it a little bit, but it's not in the main news. 210, there's a small town close to Montreal called Mont-Saint-Hilaire, which is lovely if you go around there. And, you know, there's rich people there, and it's about 15 minutes for Radio-Canada to come to that place. Well, the mayor saw these trucks. Do you know these trucks? They're used to, you know these trucks? The mayor didn't know that this was on his land, on his place, so he called CBC. And then what we say, it's supposed to be a Canadian expression, the shit hit the fan. Everything was easy. It's like having a bonfire, you know, at the beginning, doesn't show. Then for 18 months, Every day it was in the news. All kinds of news, but all the time. We have this comic show, a bit like this hour is 22 minutes, but we have a couple in Quebec. It was there all the time. It was really amazing. 128,000, that's those who were asking for the moratorium. But there was also another petition of 250,000 people asking for the Prime Minister to get out of there. This is big. It was fun, actually. Then the industry reacts. And this is, I'm really sad for them. They hold 3 public meetings saying, we'll fix that. You'll see, we'll show them because they don't have the right information and, you know, they're insecure. Well, it really went really, really, really bad for them. So the first one was André Caillé, and I have to say that André Caillé was really the hero behind the ice storm that we had in 1998. He was in charge of Hydro-Québec, and he was wonderful. He was really... So that's why they took him, because they said if that guy is a hero, it will turn out well, and he knows about energy. Didn't work. So then we got Lucien Bouchard. Everybody knows who Lucien Bouchard is. They said, this is the typical Quebec hero. He founded the Bloc Québécois. He was Minister of Environment. It's great. Went worse. And then they put André Boisclair. André Boisclair is the guy behind the politique de l'eau, the water policy. So 3 heroes, the biggest heroes they could find, it failed. The civil society reacted. You know, I'm sure in New Brunswick we have this thing. I think that the main difference with New Brunswick from what Anne said is that we didn't really have the police. The police was there, but it was not a confrontation. They were, they were occupied with the students, so. Yes. And just to tell you, that's another picture. This picture is very interesting because you can see the name of the villages that were against shale gas. You can see the political parties. You can see a bit everybody that is there. So we had all those groups. We had artists. Artists are a wonderful body of people. It's very, very useful. They're very useful. Young people, there's been a 600 kilometers walk, which is very close to what Indigenous people do. Through all the villages, from center of Quebec to Montreal, to really say we want a moratorium for 20 years this time. Lawyers are with us, jurists and lawyers, very, very useful. And all these people are working, it's volunteers, farmers that say that doesn't make sense. 120 groups of citizens are still there, students and teachers. I had a home, students from all grades except primary school that came to see me to have some details because they were doing research on shale gas. That means from 12-year-old to 50 with the PhD and sometimes less. Engineers helped us also, and local and provincial politicians, because at one point they get into the thing. And we had, it's funny what Anne was saying about the water that wouldn't be tested. In our place, there was this campaign with the citizens group where you would sign that you don't allow people on your property, these people on your property. But the problem is that if I say I don't want anybody on my property, the industry said, okay, no problem, we'll go see your neighbor, and your neighbor will let us drill under. So what we did is complete villages. 95% of the villages, all the territory, same thing. It's a good deterrent. So then the government reacts. And we have what we call the BAP and the C. A BAP is a wonderful tool. It's supposed to be for the public. It's a public consultation tool. And it's really what the public want to say about a subject. So they had one BAP. Usually BAP is really relaxed, and it's really, you can even give poems, and it's really like, we had a wonderful one on water with that André Boisclair. But this one was really like, you can talk only for 5 minutes, and then it was really like military. But still, at the end they said, we don't know enough, let's do a C. A C is a strategic environmental assessment. And then you have all these experts that do all these studies that Mike is dreaming about. So they're all in French, they're all there. But that was interesting because they put a commission saying we'll put many people, from different stakeholders related to shale gas, except a little detail. The environmental group had the right to have somebody, and we also thought that the citizens group should be there also in the commission. I was the one recommended by the environmental groups, and it was refused because there was only one environmental group who said, no, we want somebody else, and it's the somebody else who got the job, who didn't fit what the BAP was asking, but it's kind of a little political. But this guy was not against shale gas and was not even critical of shale gas, so that was very useful. But even with everybody being neutral or for shale gas, results have to be studied. So we do another BAP. The second BAP, it says can only be done when there's many conditions that are met, which are close to the 5 conditions of Nova Scotia and are probably close to what's happening a bit everywhere. And the second C is now in place. The second BAP, though, it's Philippe Couillard who was in the power. You know, we had the Liberals, then we had the PQ, and the Liberals came back. And then he says it's not worth economically. I'm not putting a moratorium, but it's not interesting, and there's no social acceptability. That you called another, what? Social license. So when we did the first BAP, the other thing also, and you'll probably have the same thing, is that you cannot say you cannot study if it's a good idea or not. We could only give our impression and opinion, because they call that opinion, on how we could do it. So people, which are really disobedient, decided a lot to say we don't want it, and we don't want it for this, that. And they allowed it a bit. So no moratorium. The first strategic environmental assessment was on economy, which is typical. So the focus was on economic benefits with some concerns for the society and the environment. It's not really important when you think about it. And then you had social acceptability that was supposed to be studied. And one of the perverse effects, and you might get that at one point, is there's one teacher who thought that she was really clever. And she said, I will go and ask the citizens group, what are the strategies to fight shale gas? And they will be so nice that they will all tell us what they do as strategy. But we're all in a network, so what we said is we're not answering the teacher. It was very clear. We're not giving our strategies. We had some problems with her after. She didn't like us. Numerous risks for health and environment that came out very clear, and I think we used the one from New Brunswick that Anne was talking about. And no moratorium still. There was 400 people. This was the 15th of December. Around the 15th of December, we had to give our memoirs just after Christmas, so we worked over Christmas. 400 people, we listened to the 15 hours of public consultation. Nobody said something positive on shale gas. Some were neutral, but there was absolutely none on shale gas. Oops. Second BAP. What I just said. So let's do a new strategic environmental on hydrocarbon this time, and this is going on now. So today, shale gas, there's no shale gas now, mostly because there's no, the Prime Minister is not for it, and we have this C, so it's a kind of a blurb, but a blurb might be very good. Because sometimes when you have the legal moratorium, they decide what they put in a moratorium. And I think in New Brunswick, somebody told me today that it means that they can do exploration, but not exploitation. All the danger are in the exploration, because the exploitation is mostly putting the pipe. So this is not a moratorium. It's actually a license to drill. We have only 31 wells, 19 are leaking, and the industry says this is perfectly normal. That's the way it works with these wells. It's a bit like your tire. When you go with your car, sometimes there was less air. Wow. Citizens now oppose all forms of hydrocarbons because we've got the trains. This is related to New Brunswick also. You all know about the horrible accident of Lac Mégantic. The railroad is the tracks are in a very bad shape. And if you're interested in justice, most of the train tracks are where the poor neighborhoods are in the villages. We oppose, I don't know if you saw our fight against the beluga, for the belugas against TransCanada. Yes, that was fun. And there's a big thanks, by the way, and I don't want to be political, but the NDP on this one really helped, because TransCanada was saying that it was people from Montreal who didn't want this and the people from Kakuna wanted it. So the deputy from NDP said, yeah, okay, we'll check. We went to every house and we said, do you want it or not? And 2/3 didn't want it. Yes. It's also the super tanker who are coming to Montreal now that you probably have very close to your place also. So it's more global, the opposition. But it's still in the media a lot. And this is very important. The biggest risk, Mike was talking about risk, the biggest risk for these companies are the people. Because companies work with investment. Investment is when people invest their money, and they invest their money in places that they trust, that they trust. And they don't trust companies who have lots of opponents. But there's encouraging fact. If you look at the surveys, most of the surveys in Quebec says we don't want hydrocarbons. We want to go way faster into renewable energy projects. And I think you know, 97% of our electricity now is from hydroelectricity. So it's mostly renewable. And the rest of it is wind turbines. And we closed the nuclear plant. We closed a big gas fire plant, and the other one's not working. So it's mostly renewable. The industry and the government are very quiet, but they still talk. But I'm talking on the shale gas. Now they're interested in petrol, in oil, but on shale gas it's quiet. And this is the other big thing. All the techniques and all the strategy, and it's the same thing here. All the success that we had with shale gas is used now against the other hydrocarbons project, because we can tell people, yes, it works. And the last thing is citizens group has money now. There's a guy called Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois who was at one of the top of the student association during the Maple Revolution. And he won this $25,000 award from, I think, the Médaille du Gouverneur Général. And he decided to refuse it. But instead of giving back the money, he said, I'm putting the money on the table, and if you follow me with putting the same amount, we'll give that to a citizens group. 3-4 days, $400,000 they got that. So they decided to give it to Culpa Chez Nous. Culpa Chez Nous is the network against pipelines, shale gas, and all this. So now they have money to work, but they're still volunteers, so it's not easy, but it's fun. And the last thing, which is, you know that there was another meeting today with Michael Binion talking about the fact that shale gas was green technology. Well, it's not. First thing is that it's not renewable. It's in the ground. It's there. Once there's none, there's none. And what Michael was saying is absolutely true. Most of the wells are very good in the first year. After that, they're no good. Production versus combustion. You will see that all the natural gas guys talk to you about natural gas being better than oil. They're talking about the combustions and at the end of the truck. When you use it, you have to challenge them on the production, the way it's produced. And they're saying, for example, that fracking's been there all the time. No, fracking's been for the vertical fracking, and it was used when it was pockets of gas. So it was not invasive. It was it's still fossil fuel, but it was way less invasive. So the other thing is that our kids will think that we were really crazy to spend energy on energy. To produce energy, you need energy. This is not the case with renewable energy. Once the wind turbine is up, once the solar panel are there, once the biogas plant is there, you don't need energy. The energy is the natural one. So it doesn't make sense to use 20% of all the gas that is produced in Canada for the tar sands, for example. It increased climate disturbance. As long as it stays in the ground, it's very quiet, it stays there, and there's nothing happening. And it's very invasive and stressful. And the only natural gas is a PR thing. It should have been called gas, or it should have been called fossil gas. It has nothing to do with natural gas. And the answer from the industry said, yeah, but 350 million years ago, it was organic. Yes. So was oil, and so was coal. Biogas is, do you know what it is? Because I don't think are there plants in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick? There's 10 coming to Quebec. Mostly it's all your organic waste, your manure, your wasted water, all this goes into a big yogurt. You know when you do yogurt? You put the heat up just a bit, 30 degrees, 40 degrees, and it brings up the methane that you capture, and that is transformed into natural gas because natural gas is methane. This one, you need to do it because if you leave it in the landfills, for example, it goes directly as a greenhouse gas. But when you collect it and you replace the oil with that, then you have a positive view. You should learn more about that. If you want me on that one day, I'll tell you all about it. But then when they challenge you with natural gas is good, you say, yes, biogas. Go for it. And this is what was... we hope that Michael Binion would be here to discuss shale gas. So I went to see a stock market of the company Quester, which is one of the 12 companies in Quebec. And as you see, everything goes really, really, really well. Maybe not for him. For Quester, let's say. Merci.